Kannst du sich vorstellen, in einem Land zu leben oder in einem Land zu geboren, ohne rechtliche Zugehörigkeit zu haben oder keinen Status und keinen Pass zu haben? Das bedeutet auch, du nicht reisen können. Das ist, dass genau darum geht über unser heutiges Thema, Staatenlos in Europa, ein Leben zwischen Grenzen und Zugehörigkeiten. Mein Gast ist Aleksejs Ivashuks, der ist Staatenlos-Expert und Aktivist, beschäftigt und engagiert sich über dieses Thema in Europa zusammen mit Organisationen wie UNHCR, Amnesty International und so weiter. Welcome to Unfiltered Podcast, where we deep dive into conversations and discussions that actually matters and of course that actually interest you. Today we will be looking at a topic that is very sensitive about statelessness. Today we will be looking at the disparities between statelessness and living in a country that is actually borne by borders and belonging. My guest is a stateless expert who was forced to flee with his family from Latvia in his own country and grew up in between Canada and America. He is an expert in this area. Through his advocacy that he started since 2016, he has made himself a name for himself and also helped people that are actually in such a legal limbo. Welcome to Unfiltered Podcast, Alex. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. First, I want to know, again, thank you for joining us. What do you remember about growing up in Latvia? I mean, let's say, how did this shape your sense of identity?
Well, when I was born there, and my parents are from there, and they voted for the independence of the country. Unfortunately, the equal rights to nationality were not granted, contrary to the political promises that were made by the country. So as a kid, of course, you don't think about these things. I grew up in US and Canada. I was shielded from the reality of being stateless for a while, although I still paid attention to it, on the other side of the ocean. And it was only when I returned to Europe that I began to face the discrimination and the issues tied to my status. But as a kid, yeah, I didn't really think about it much, but it did influence me to really learn about what is nationality and what is statelessness and why am I being deprived of some basic rights and freedoms. And so that's something I think heavily influenced my interest and my identity. I think a lot of people have this notion that as a stateless person, you have a crisis on your hand, identity crisis. In my case, I don't think that's how it turned out to be. I know for a lot of stateless people it is like that, but in my case, I feel like statelessness actually contributed to a very strong sense of identity because I was forced to learn from every society and culture that I grew up in. And I ended up living in 8 different countries actually, looking for a place to call home.
Wow.
And I have valued this learning. So, in that sense, I feel like statelessness actually, in a strange way, positively contributed to my sense of identity. It made it self-made as opposed to be dependent on a state actor or a particular country that just force-fed me answers what is right or wrong.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I mentioned in my moderation, your family was among 700 other people that were effectively forced to leave their own country, Latvia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and this led them to the US. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And I was, and
Yeah,
I want to,
I have to correct you there a little bit because it was not forced migration per se. It's a different form of statelessness. So one third of the country was made stateless. That's 700,000 people, not 700 people.
700,000, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but very few people were able to leave the country, as
Okay.
oftentimes happens when you become stateless, you don't exactly have good documents to leave the country.
Hmm.
So my family was lucky in that we had political connections in the US, and my mother was a highly sought after marine biologist, and so we were able to leave for the US because of these connections, not because we were even necessarily forced out of the country. In fact, I mean, the country has always relied on these minorities and hasn't had the wish to for these minorities to leave, which is a strange situation. At the one hand, it made them non-citizens, as they call it, and at the same time, they've continued to need these people because they have been the backbone of the economy.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different form of statelessness as usually happens in other countries. So there's a little bit of a dilemma with it. Yes, paradox.
Yeah. And how does this affect you, the opportunity of growing up? Could it have been different, maybe? Or was it a good choice?
Absolutely. So one part I already covered in that, look, statelessness provided a lot of valuable lessons about what is human behavior and why do we fail with values and why can't we protect democratic rights or minority rights. But at the same time, it also means lack of access to opportunities. So where another person who has a nationality has to only try once or twice in doing something, a stateless person has to try maybe 1,000 or 10,000 times.
Yeah.
So you can go actually insane in trying to even even achieve very elementary things or accomplish elementary things, from as little as getting a SIM card to wanting to travel somewhere to wanting to go to a particular university, or marrying or emigrating somewhere. So all of these rights are usually taken for granted. So for a stateless person like myself, there's always been an uphill battle to achieve these things. So again, the upside is that this experience has taught me how to fight for these kind of rights, but at the same time, it's been an extremely stressful experience and very arbitrary and unpredictable because the rules are either not there or they're corrupted or they're just not aligned to help stateless people. And there's plenty of us in the world. So I like to put it this way that statelessness is life at extreme difficulty mode. So on the one hand, it's horrible. On the other hand, if you can go through that hell and take in the experience and the lesson that you get from it, it can be rewarding. But I definitely would not suggest it to anybody. Don't set your life to extreme difficulty mode because it takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your relationships. It takes a toll on everything you do. So there's a heavy cost to it for sure.
Yeah. And your current status, you actually live between borders and belonging or try to belong in your own continent and in your own bad country in Latvia. How do you live with such challenges, denials? Let's call it a dilemma. How do you survive it?
Yes, I have to keep moving because I haven't lived in Latvia since I was a small kid. I did eventually found a place to call home. I really liked that place. For the first time in my life, it was stability and access to human rights in a predictable way, but at the same time combined with a feeling of home. So in US and Canada as well, it's had stability, but I didn't really had the sense of home. But the place that I found, that place is called Ukraine. So I lived there for 3 years rather happily. And then, of course, once Russia invaded Ukraine and was surrounding the city where I lived, I had to make a difficult choice to leave. And so now I'm in back in the European Union, but I have to keep moving because there's a lot of technicalities to that freedom of movement. And I'm looking for a new place to go home, and I'm already having forging some plans to move to Malta, and I'm very happy that Malta does not import any arbitrary discrimination. And I already talked to immigration there, and they are opening their doors to people of my status because they just don't want to import discrimination. I guess well, Latvia insists that we have the same rights as Latvian citizens. And they've publicly also claimed that we have freedom of movement rights in the European Union. So the problem is that in practice, that's not how it works. There is a lot of barriers to our movements and any ambitions. And even though on paper it looks like we're supposed to have the same rights, in practice we definitely don't.
And you mentioned you lived in 8 countries already. Was this before 2016 when you finally decided to move back to the European Union? What actually influenced you, or what was the motive behind you coming back to European Union, despite knowing that there could be challenges?
Oh yes. Well, as I already briefly mentioned, I didn't feel at home in US and Canada. I kept moving from city to city. Initially, I thought it was municipal issue that I was just in the wrong city. Eventually, I moved to Vancouver, which is pretty much the best city you can live in the Americas, if not the world. And there, after many years living there, I realized that it's not about the city. It's about how I'm just not in the right culture. That I am European. Like my ancestors are from the area that's today called Latvia, and so we're partly ethnically, we're partly Ukrainian, partly Latvian. On my mother's side, it's not clear how far our roots extend in Latvia because of the 2 world wars. The record keeping wasn't that great, or documents were destroyed and family relations cut. I knew that I was European, and when I lived in Canada and US, I was coming back to Europe on a more frequent basis, especially in the latter years of living in North America. And I gradually realized that I belong on my own continent. I'm a European, I belong in Europe, and that's what really contributed to my decision to move back to Europe, because this is my continent. So there's no politicians that can change that fact, no matter how much they want to. So I knew I was gonna face challenges, but the irony is that, I read the Latvian government's official statements that there's no discrimination, that we basically have the same rights as Latvian citizens. And I kind of suspected that, okay, probably in Latvia, that's not going to be the case if I move back to Latvia. But if I go to other EU countries and start living there, other EU countries wouldn't want to undermine fundamental values and principles of the European Union. That was kind of my assumption.
That was miscalculated, right? That was miscalculated because you thought that EU member state would not prioritize, such rights for its own people.
Yeah, that they wouldn't want to undermine minority rights in this absurd situation where, the home country where I'm from is claiming that there's no problem, that we have the same rights, but then kind of is doing a lot in their power to make sure that's not really actually the case when you are abroad. And when I was abroad, it's kind of like it's a very gray area, and it's gray on purpose. And so it really becomes unpredictable how you will be treated when you're in another country. That's why it's such a pleasant surprise that Malta has a good practice and they don't discriminate. And I had a similar experience in Poland when I moved there, but I was working for Thomson Reuters, where it was not a problem for them at all, no matter what the immigration ruled. But the immigration officials, when they looked at my documents and they saw my history and family history, they said, "Well, I'm a native of Latvia. I'm native to that territory, so they're not going to discriminate based on my non-citizen passport that I was issued." So based on my nativity, they ruled that I will be treated as a EU citizen, which is something Latvia claims that basically um, that we have to be. Well, they don't claim that. They recently began to claim that we're to be regarded as Latvian nationals, but they keep the non-citizen passports for us. And this is I don't want to get into these technicalities. I think it will take us many hours about the differences between claims of nationality versus citizenship and how these are used interchangeably and in a very flippant way in different international organizations, depending on what the political stance that you have and whether you're state-centric or not. But the point is that this kind of status that we have, oftentimes it's called a sub-citizenship as well. The point is that we don't have equal rights, and it creates a lot of problems for us when we travel or when we try to find an employer or when we try to build relationships or when we try to do anything in our life, especially if you're outside of the country that created the status for you. So it is a problem.
In your view, does Latvia's treatment of non-citizens contradict the European Union's values of equality, inclusion, and human rights on statelessness issues?
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, the official position of Latvia is that there's no problem at all because we're basically equal to Latvian citizens. So I would be happy for that to be true. So I think we should be working to achieve that because in our experience, there's a lot of problems with that. And the problem is that our problems are ignored, as if we are all to believe that that we're equals. So equality is not something that just exists in abstract. If somebody is experiencing discrimination, if somebody is arbitrarily being denied the right to move to another EU country, or is being denied many of these rights that are essential to defining you having the same rights as a citizen or a national, then we need some work done to make sure that this doesn't happen, right? But unfortunately, right now, this is very much under the carpet and nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And the impression I have is that, there's just kind of patience to wait for all of us to die in like 100 some years, and then resolve that problem this way. Although, some children have been born with this status, even recently. So yeah, we were looking at 100+ years for that kind of tactic to play out. But I don't think it's a very good tactic for the fulfillment of EU values and principles, because then it will entrench in history that this is how these minorities, EU minorities, were treated. And it's actually very dangerous when you have particularly aggressive authoritarian states nearby who would love to use that as an excuse for whatever they're planning.
Yeah, that sounds already a lot of difficulties, and I was wondering, how is it like traveling? I mean, because if you don't have an identity, you don't belong. I wonder what's on your passport and how are you allowed to fly out? Because you're not just living in different countries, you're frequently traveling across the continent and beyond. How is it? Do you face any difficulties?
No, absolutely. I've been denied boarding a number of times, and there's been plenty of attempts to deny me boarding. Been detained, had plenty of times authorities question whether my passport is even real or whether it's fake. So when I travel, I know the rules quite well, actually, to the point where I think sometimes I intimidate the border officials because I start telling them about, what the status is and what it is not, and so on and so forth. and about my rights. But there's a bunch of things to break down here. So first of all, there's a lot of forms of statelessness. And in our case, we're a bit more lucky in that we're actually allowed to have legal identity.
Okay.
That's not very good. That creates a lot of problems for us when we travel, but at least we're allowed to have it, and that the passport is actually good for 10 years, which is a big privilege for a stateless person because usually you have your travel documents issued for maybe a year or two, and you have to pay a lot of money for it. So the big advantage that we have is that our non-citizen passports, as they're called, that they're valid for 10 years, but to give you a taste of the contradiction of the whole status, so officially by Latvian law and the constitutional court and public statements of the government, we cannot be called aliens or foreigners because the only legal connection we have is to our own country, Latvia. And of course, there's also Estonian non-citizens, but there's a bit of a difference there. I don't want to get into it. But so we have this passport that's called a non-citizen passport, and in Latvian, the term is nepilsona. But into English, they translated this term as alien's passport, and into French, they translate it as foreigner's passport. So as this is actually not in line with Latvian law or the
Yeah.
constitutional court.
Yeah.
So there's no need to call us aliens or foreigners, especially not in our primary form of legal identification. And this is the root of all of our problems when we travel, because people don't understand why, as Latvian nationals, as Latvian government clearly recently began to claim, why as Latvian nationals, as people who belong in Latvia and are long-rooted minorities there, and actually some are ethnic Latvians as well, why do we have alien's passport? Because alien means you're not from the country.
No.
So it's a complete contradiction and it's very Kafkaesque.
Yeah.
And we've tried to communicate with the Latvian authorities to ask them like, hey, can you remove that? Because it's not in line with the domestic law.
Mm-hmm.
Their argument was that, oh, this is something lost in translation. This is something, the poverty of English and French languages. So, I disagree there. I think the two terms are not there as a coincidence.
All right. And fast forward, you've become an expert. You've made a name for yourself on the issue of stateless by advocating for people fighting for such legal limbo. And along the line, you founded and lead the Apartheid Network. What's actually Apartheid, and what is the objective of Apartheid Network?
Yes, so Upper Network. So I've been involved in the field for over 9 years now. An Upper Network was formed 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I formed it because I realized that by yourself as a stateless person, you really can't do much. You do need to connect to other stateless people. You need to learn together. You need to make your voice stronger together.
Mm-hmm.
But Upper Network was a response to the wide gaps we have in our field of work. This whole topic, this whole subject has been handled by specialists, very few specialists,
Mm-hmm.
who really tend to lack any connection to the experience of statelessness. They don't have any, and worse yet is that they haven't really been connected to people who are affected by statelessness or
Okay.
such communities. And so I realized that this is a shocking gap because how can you have experts who have no experience of the subject working in their little bubbles, whether they're academic and in an academic bubble, or whether they're NGOs and they're in a very state-centric and NGO bubble, how can they accurately work and achieve justice and make sure that they don't do more harm than good
Mm-hmm.
if they have no experience of statelessness, but also if they're not actually connected with people who are with the ground reality of
Yeah.
statelessness. And so I realized this gap needed to be closed and that we need to make a collective effort as stateless people to come together and be at these high-level meetings in Geneva and Brussels and many other cities to provide our expertise, ground-level expertise of what statelessness is and what it is not, and what are the gaps and misconceptions, and also talk about the very state-centric nature of how this whole subject is still to this day handled. And there's a lot of contradictions in that way. It's like there's this assumption that it's the actors, it's only the actors who cause the issue that have the power to resolve it. Well,
Yeah.
that's absurd. Like they're the ones who cause it. So what we need to do is to hold such actors to accountability to the values that they sign up for, the values of democracy, justice, minority rights, and good governance. Good governance is key, and we cannot have good governance if it is quite easy for any state actor to just get rid of portions of their population, whether it's minorities or those who politically dissent.
Yeah.
But all of these people are essential to running a good government. If there's a lot of corruption in your elections, you should yield to the protests on the street and recognize that, okay, you need to have stability in your country, and that therefore you need to have a proper democratic process. But that's just an example, and it's actually it's about the recent development with Belarus and how the political exiles are facing statelessness right now, and we're trying to help these people as well. But it's an example of how if state actors want to actually have stability for everybody in their own country and for neighboring countries and all people therein, they need to pay attention to statelessness and they need to pay attention to how it's abused. It's used as a tactic to just cut off portions of your own population.
With Abonniert, you have projects and initiatives that you're currently running to, diversify your campaign or advocacy on the issue of statelessness. And what actually are some of the ongoing activities, let's say main activities that you're currently on?
So the staple work that we've been doing has been connected to awareness raising on statelessness. Whenever we discuss this subject, the common reaction we get is that people don't really know anything about it. Even people who should really know about it, like UN agencies and politicians, EU parliamentarians, immigration officials, it's extremely rare that they know anything about the subject, which is kind of crazy because this is like a really widespread issue and a very serious issue that undermines the very nation state model of governance.
Yeah.
So they should really know. So that's why from the beginning, we've found it very important to provide guest lectures systemically. So we don't do one-off guest lectures and then done. No, we systemically try to provide as many guest lectures as capacity and our own sanity would allow for. We try to raise awareness of the issue, not just among the small circles of experts that already know about it, which has been the tendency up until the rise of stateless-led organizations. But we also want the general public to know more about it, more universities to be engaged in it, more public officials to be more familiar with it, and so on and so forth. So, because the decision makers and people in political power, they're not going to pay attention to this unless people in general pay attention to this. So that's the reason we focus so much on awareness raising. And then other projects we have a lot of impact projects. So as stateless people, we see the problem more accurately. So by the same token, or the other side of that token is that we see the solutions more accurately. And that's why we have very specific projects that tackle specific problems and barriers that stateless people face. So for instance, we have a very large-scale financial inclusion project that actually helps not just stateless people, but refugees and asylum seekers as well.
Yeah.
Because many of such people, when they try to go open a bank account, the bank oftentimes arbitrarily just refuses service. for various questionable reasons, and they do so because it's like a business decision, and it's a serious issue. And we've noticed that a lot of international organizations have already noticed this as being a serious issue, but there has been lackluster effort to tackle it. So we're trying to drive this forward. And then we have other projects like in childhood statelessness prevention for the exiles that I already mentioned from Belarus. The EU has actually already made statements. Brussels has made statements that this is a serious issue, that EU member states should pay attention to this and help these people. But nobody seems to know, and it's tied to how nobody knows what statelessness is. So
Yeah.
they don't understand what danger these people are facing. And then we have other projects tied to blockchain because we see a lot of potential, not just potential, we already have, some solutions in blockchain for stateless people. Banking is a good example because, if the bank denies you opening an account, you can open a crypto wallet, and some stateless people already take advantage of that. So they don't have to keep their money under the mattress or anything like that. And yeah, various many other projects that we've become quite ambitious that we're struggling with capacity with now. But the point is that we're not just talking the talk, we're trying to walk the walk and making some policy changes and practical changes that will improve the livability of life of stateless people, sorry, and that it makes life more bearable for stateless people and refugees as well.
That's amazing. You're actually challenging systems through international engagement and lectures. How impactful is this to your work, or are you even being heard?
Well, we noticed the good news is that we noticed that we've definitely been heard, and we see some changes in policy and behavior of UN agencies, for instance. So we, for instance, had a big success in persuading UNHCR to drop its mysterious arbitrary barriers that they've had of stateless people applying for UNHCR jobs. It was really silly because stateless people basically couldn't apply for UNHCR jobs because one is that there was no selection in a mandatory nationality drop down in a job application. There was no selection of undefined or stateless, or you couldn't leave it blank. So you were basically forced to lie. But even worse is that for many years, talking to UN, HR, and legal teams, we discovered that even if there was such option, they actually weren't sure what to do with such an application because they were not used to, processing papers of stateless people who actually never did it before. So for many years, we actually advocated for UNHCR to fix that issue. And so the good news is that as of August of last year, we had success in UNHCR finally resolving that issue. And now stateless people can apply for UNHCR jobs. Now we have still a long way to go because other UN agencies have not followed suit. So if any of other UN agencies are listening, would love for your better cooperation. We are right now moving turning the wheels on this, but it would be good for more partners and UN agencies to step forward and apply pressure for this to be done as soon as possible because it's in violation of UN's internal policies, and it's also in violation in domestic and regional laws, anti-discrimination laws, because you're not supposed to deny a job opportunity to someone based on their origin or nationality or lack thereof. So it's important to make progress in that regard, and we're actually excited that we're actually crucial in making impact. And sorry, last thing I want to mention is that we found that we made really good progress in persuading the international community and international organizations to take us more seriously, to not treat us tokenistically as just some individuals that have sad stories to tell, but to begin treating us as experts in our own right that have a lot of expertise to bring to the table and to treat us as missing crucial pieces of the puzzle to addressing statelessness. So we've had really good progress. We see that due to positive feedback that we receive, all these international organizations have learned that it is very valuable to bring us in and treat us as equals. We still have a way to go, I think, for us to be treated as equals. We're still kind of treated tokenistically, but hopefully with more and more time and more shared experience, this will come out more.
You actually work with several international organizations, including UNHCR that you just mentioned a positive side about. I wanted to ask, what progress have been made so far in Europe regarding stateless issues, and what do you think remains and need to be done?
Well, sadly, the progress has been rather limited, and when it is achieved, we have to keep in mind we still work within a state-centric legal frameworks, and there's a lot of dependence on the states to cooperate. And then you can imagine the difficulty of making any progress because state actors don't really want to step on the toe of each other for people like the stateless people. Because when you're stateless, there's no actor, by definition, there's no state actor that wants to put your interest on any agenda. So I find that in order to achieve better progress, we do need to be more creative. We need to match and outmatch the creativity of state actors that create mass statelessness. And this is something that has been lacking. In my experience, all these papers, all these official protections and conventions, and I think a lot of stateless people would actually agree, they're not really useful, unfortunately. And a lot has to do with imbalances of power, and how even if a state actor signs up to 1954, 1961 UN Convention on Statelessness, and even if they ratify these, that still doesn't mean that their good practices are guaranteed. That on the ground level, these things will still be respected, and then of course each state actor is very free in how they can adjust to what they sign up for. And of course, you can never predict what political party will come in and what political party will exit. And it creates a bit of a arbitrary gray mess in the chances for progress. So that's why, going back to my point of why we need better, more creative methods, and we're looking into these. That's why we're looking into blockchain. That's why I'm personally excited to see the potential in residence and citizenship by investment programs that stand to benefit from opening doors to stateless people. But of course, they don't understand that stateless people exist, or they have very wrong conceptions about who stateless people are. And so we're looking to work with such partners who create these citizenship by investment programs to alleviate these irrational barriers that are set up to create pathways by which stateless people can resolve their situation. And this is just one example of creativity that hasn't been happening, like alternative ways and pathways that have not been utilized or built. And so there's a lot of opportunity. There's a sea of opportunity there. And this is not tapped into. And personally, I've been really frustrated in that, I see so much opportunity that more orthodox, traditional experts in statelessness just never seem to see because they just don't have the experience of statelessness. So that's why I think it's so important for us as stateless people, again, to speak up and to be involved, because without us, we just can't be taking, we will not be taking the right direction in resolving or addressing this topic.
how do international bodies respond to cases like Latvia's, where people are denied full citizenship rights despite living in their own country of birth?
Well, look, this issue is quite widespread. So in the last 100 years, most European countries cause mass statelessness within their own borders. And if you ask, anybody living in these countries, 99.9999% of the population will know nothing about these mass statelessness cases. And it's a shock for people to not know it. And that's a reaction we get from people all the time. How come I didn't know? And it goes back again to how we live in a very state-centric reality, and the international community has an important role to play in alleviating this topic and preventing it. But we still don't have effective preventative measures. It's still as easy to make people stateless as it was 100 years ago. And the thing is that a lot ties into the absolute monopoly that state actors have in notions of nationality. So each state actor has absolute monopoly on determining who their own nationals are. Moreover, state actors have absolute monopoly on determining who belongs and who doesn't. And very importantly, each state actor has absolute monopoly on legal identification. So they can actually play around with legal identification in an infinite way. They can make somebody citizen but not a national, or they can make somebody non-citizen but a national, or they can make somebody alien national non-citizen, whatever that means. So there's a lot of creativity, but it's not new, and state actors have a long history all over Europe and all over the world of utilizing these monopolies in very detrimental way to the society that they're supposed to actually protect, and to their own members that they're supposed to protect. And it's unpredictable because political wins are never predictable. So you can never know what political power will come in tomorrow, or what kind of ideas they will have on who belongs and who doesn't, or who deserves this kind of ID and who deserves a different kind of ID that they'll claim that it's the same thing. So, yeah, I mean, in Europe, I don't want to get into too much, but basically, you have UK as a classical example because they have 6 types of sub-citizenships. To this day, that Council of Europe many years ago, in 1974, I believe, ruled that it's racist. UK should not be having such sub-citizenship. But to this day, millions of people have UK sub-citizenship. So they call British citizens like overseas citizens, or other categories of citizens, but they don't even have the right to come to the UK. They don't have the right to. It's absurd. They don't have the right to come to their own country where they're citizens of.
Yeah. For our viewers and listeners who might not know or understand what stateless is, how would you explain this, or how would you explain its human impact on a daily life, for example?
Well, it's fairly horrible. It's a hell. It's a complete hell. You're forced to march through hell and be on your own about it. There's no effective mechanisms. There's some, but they're not sufficient. There's When they do exist, there's so many gaps that it almost makes it pointless that they even exist. Because it's more. Sometimes I think like it's more a marketing ploy for the international community to say like, well, we have these mechanisms, yes, but there's no point to them if they're not effective at all. So it's a complete hell. You don't really have access to basic human rights because people think that we have human rights because we're human. That's not why we have human rights. We have human rights because we are a valuable resource to state actors. And if they don't claim us as a resource, if they don't claim that we belong to them, then we, by the same token, don't get these rights that come from belonging to a state actor. This is a very realistic, crude way of putting it. But I think, yeah, it's real. That's how it is. You just don't
It's
get any
weird.
rights if you don't belong.
Yeah, it's actually weird to be denied your own fundamental human rights when you are human. Yeah, it has been an interesting conversation. And on that note, how can individuals and civil society contribute to ending stateless in Europe and beyond?
We need a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of actors who are already doing something on the subject, but they're not even connected to other actors. So, academics don't talk so much to NGOs. NGOs don't talk to so much to, government actors, or probably government actors don't really want to talk to NGOs. It's the other way around. UN agencies have a lot more, I think, how do I put it, responsibility for facilitating these connections, but also they need to focus more on this topic because it's so critical to good governance. To the avoiding mass statelessness is so critical to entrenching good governance and making sure that people are not arbitrarily thrown out of the system. So it's very important for all of these for all of these actors, state actors and NGOs and academics, and very importantly, stateless-led organizations and stateless communities and stateless individuals, for all of them to work together much better, to have creative projects, to not be afraid to go out of the established state-centric narratives and frameworks to tackle the issue. But of course, we have a long way to go, even in raising awareness of the issue, because we can't tackle the issue if we think it doesn't exist or we don't know that it exists. So it's very important to even team up to have more awareness raising projects, but also with better awareness, we also need to have practical initiatives that are built very closely with the input of people who actually have experience of statelessness. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of bad initiatives that end up doing more harm than good, and it's a lot of that is tied into how stateless people are not leading these initiatives. It's led by people who have no clue of what statelessness is or have a very bad clue of what it is. And usually, such actors, unfortunately, are more influenced by the actors that create the problem rather than by by the people who are affected by it, who are victims of the circumstance. So it's very important that there's better cooperation across the board.
Aleksej, what gives you hope in your own advocacy in ending stateless in Europe?
Hope, well, I want to call it self-made. You have to make your own hope because the harsh lessons you learn as a stateless person is that nobody can help you. So you have to build up that hope. You have to, as I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, where somebody else needs to try once or twice on something, we have to try 1,000 times, and we have to keep in mind that there is hope because maybe if you try 1,000 times, there's going to be a positive outcome. It's difficult. It's a hell. It's a lot of will that you have to have, and I understand many of my colleagues that struggle with this. They don't have hope, but they feel like they don't have any more hope because they're just tired. They're just tired of having to try 1,000 times for very elementary things that they should have in the first place. But I want to say there is hope, and to stateless people, I want to send a message to stateless people all over the world that you're not alone. We don't know how many millions of us are there. The data itself is actually very corrupted by a state perspective because for the states it's very embarrassing to reveal that they have their own populations that are stateless. So, but in terms of people who don't have any legal identity, we're talking about 1 billion people in the world. That's a World Bank statistic. So, and oftentimes on technicalities, I find it like a dark humor. These people are not even counted as stateless because hypothetically maybe they can resolve their situation. And then that's not even in line with what UNHCR guidelines talk about, where you cannot discount somebody being stateless based on hypotheticals, based on
Yeah.
what they might be able to achieve in the future. You have to count them as stateless if their current situation dictates to you that no state considers such people as nationals under operation of their laws. So when you have no legal identity whatsoever, guess what? No state considers you as a national under operation of its laws. And so we need to then recognize that it's at least 1 billion people problem, and then go from there. And that's quite a few people, and we don't even know how many people have sub-citizenships and or are stateless like me with legal identities, but very questionable gray type.
And finally, Alexei, what would you leave with our audience today? Like, what would be your final message? Any advice to stakeholders, to government institutions, and to people with stateless experiences?
I would say learn about the topic. Keep in mind that as stateless people, we cannot compete with state actors in flooding the information space. Many stateless people are afraid to speak up, but more and more of our voices are beginning to be heard. So if you learn about the subject, don't just check out, the official standpoint of actors that caused the issue. Also listen to the other side. Listen to the affected people
Yeah.
and what it's like to be stateless. And so I think we need to have a healthier dialogue. So without that, we can't expect for there to be international stability or the realization of the values that we preach so much about as Europeans. So it's very important to have such a healthy dialogue and to fulfill these values and to make sure not to undermine them, whether by illegal language manipulation or distorted practices
Yeah.
or pushing around marginalized communities and individuals. We actually have to take advantage of the experience of such people to build a fairer, more just society. And that's, I think, the message I would like to leave the audience with.
Wow. Listen, read, understand, and dialogue about stateless. That's your final statement to our audience. Thank you very much for this interesting conversation, Aleksej. Your lived experience on stateless, it's quite interesting. And of course, your advocacy across Europe and beyond reminds us that citizenship is more than just a legal status. That's at least what some of the things that I actually learned about our conversation today. Citizenship should be, or it is about identity, dignity, and the right to be seen and heard. Statelessness is an issue. It will still be an issue of discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us on Unfiltered. Danke, dass ihr bei diesem interessanten Gespräch mit Aleksej dabei wart. Wenn es euch die Sendung gefreut oder interessiert habt, folgt euch auf Nymas Bantaba und über mehrere Informationen und Interviews auf Unfiltered Podcast. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.